Daniel Harris wasn't just an ordinary hiker. He was known among his friends as someone who loved adventure, but was always cautious, always prepared. On that chilly autumn afternoon, the air was crisp, the forest damp with the lingering smell of rain. Daniel parked his car at the trailhead near Mount Rainier, a place he had visited countless times before. He scribbled a quick note in his journal, left on the passenger seat. "Clearing my head today." Those were the last written words anyone would ever see from him. The early hours of his hike seemed ordinary. Rangers later confirmed that several hikers spotted a man matching Daniel's description on the lower trails. Backpack strapped tightly, walking with confidence. Nothing seemed unusual. But the witnesses disagreed on one chilling detail. Some claimed they saw him heading up the trail, while others swore they saw him going down. The times overlapped, leaving investigators baffled. As night crept in, Daniel's friends began to worry. He was a man of habit, someone who always checked in if plans changed. By 9 p.m., when he still hadn't returned, one of his closest friends drove out to the trailhead. The sight that greeted him was unsettling. Daniel's car sat alone in the lot, frost beginning to form on the windshield. Inside, his phone was tucked into the cup holder, battery full, untouched. His wallet, keys, and journal were all there. It was as though Daniel had stepped out of the car and simply vanished into the woods. The next morning, authorities launched a formal search. Dozens of volunteers, park rangers, and even helicopters combed the mountain. They found clear boot prints on the trail leading into the dense forest, presumed to be Daniel's. But after a short distance, the prints stopped abruptly, as if the ground had swallowed him whole. No broken branches, no signs of a struggle, no discarded gear. It was as if Daniel had walked into the trees and dissolved into thin air. The search dragged on for a week, every day growing more desperate. The mountain weather shifted unpredictably, sudden fog rolling in, chilling winds, and bursts of rain that wiped away any remaining traces. Despite covering miles of rugged terrain, the rescue teams found nothing. No backpack, no clothing, no body. By the 7th day, the forest stood silent, offering no answers. The official search was called off, but for Daniel's family, the nightmare had only just begun. The initial days of the search for Daniel were filled with urgency and hope. Teams of rangers, volunteers, and even military, trained search units swarmed the trails, armed with radios, maps, and dogs trained to detect human scent. They expected to find some trace, anything, a torn piece of clothing, a dropped water bottle, or footprints leading deeper into the wilderness. But the forest seemed unwilling to give up its secrets. The deeper they searched, the quieter it became, as though the mountain itself had swallowed Daniel whole. The search dogs were the first sign that something was terribly unusual. They tracked Daniel's scent confidently for about half a mile up the main trail, and then, just as suddenly, they stopped. The dogs circled, barked, and whined in confusion, unable to pick up the trail again. Handlers tried multiple times, even restarting from the parking lot, but each time, the scent ended at the very same spot. No continuation, no direction. It was as if Daniel had walked to that precise place and disappeared into thin air. Helicopters were dispatched to scan from above, their powerful spotlights slicing through the dense forest canopy. Infrared cameras swept the mountainside, searching for a heat signature in case Daniel was injured and unable to move. But the screens came back empty, showing nothing but cold, lifeless terrain. Volunteers on the ground called out his name, their voices echoing through the valleys, but the only reply was the unsettling rustle of wind through the trees. Not a single call was answered. The search became more desperate as days turned into nights. Rangers combed through ravines, overturned logs, even small caves that dotted the foothills. They deployed drones into areas too dangerous for humans, yet still no trace appeared. At night, campfires flickered in the search base camp as exhausted teams regrouped, staring into the flames, whispering theories that none dared say out loud during the day. Something about the case felt different, unnatural even. Rescuers admitted privately that they had never seen a disappearance so clean, so utterly devoid of evidence. After a full week, the official resources began to dwindle. The mountain weather grew harsher, icy rains, fog thick enough to erase entire landscapes, and winds that howled like screams. With no progress and no sign of Daniel's body, law enforcement made the grim decision to scale back operations. For the volunteers and family members, it felt like surrender. For the locals who lived in the shadow of Mount Rainier, however, it only deepened the whispers that Daniel's case was not just another missing hiker story. Something about it was far more sinister. Not long after the official search was scaled back, hikers and campers in the Mount Rainier area began reporting chilling experiences. At first, they were small details. Strange sounds echoing through the forest at night, the feeling of being watched, or distant footsteps that seemed to follow but never approach. Rangers chalked it up to paranoia and the unsettling atmosphere of the mountain. But as more stories emerged, a disturbing pattern started to take shape, and many believed these sightings were tied to Daniel's disappearance. One group of hikers swore they heard a man shouting for help from deep within the trees. The voice was faint, desperate, and repeated the same phrase over and over. "Please, over here." They followed the sound for nearly 20 minutes, weaving off the trail into the thick underbrush. But just as suddenly as it began, the voice stopped. When they checked their GPS, they were horrified to discover they had circled back to nearly the same spot, where Daniel's scent trail had vanished a year earlier. Other witnesses spoke of glimpses of a lone figure among the trees. Some described a man standing unnaturally still, half hidden in the mist, watching hikers from a distance. Others claimed they saw someone darting between tree trunks only to vanish when they tried to approach. Each time, the description was eerily similar to Daniel: tall, wearing a dark jacket, and moving strangely, as though not entirely human anymore. But when investigators checked these areas, they found nothing but untouched wilderness. Campers, too, reported unsettling encounters. In the dead of night, they would hear footsteps circling their tents, slow and deliberate. Some even described the sound of someone dragging something heavy across the ground. When they mustered the courage to unzip their tents and shine a light outside, the forest appeared empty. Yet the marks on the soil, a single line cutting through the dirt, as though something had been pulled, remained the next morning. Many refused to camp in that part of the mountain ever again. As these stories spread, the locals began whispering about Mount Rainier's dark reputation. Tales resurfaced of others who had vanished over the years, of strange lights seen weaving between the treetops, and of the mountain being a place where the line between the natural and supernatural blurred. To some, Daniel had become part of the mountain itself, his spirit wandering, his fate tied to something no human could explain. To others, these sightings meant only one thing: Daniel hadn't simply gone missing. He had been taken. For Daniel's family, the disappearance was not just a mystery, it was a living wound that refused to heal. His parents, Richard and Ellen Harris, clung to the hope that their son was still alive somewhere on the mountain. They drove to Mount Rainier nearly every weekend, retracing the trails he had walked, calling out his name into the endless trees. Each unanswered echo only deepened their heartbreak, but still, they returned, unable to accept the silence as an answer. His sister, Megan, became the most relentless in her search. She plastered missing posters not just across Washington but online, spreading Daniel's face across forums, wilderness groups, and true crime communities. She spoke to psychics, wilderness survival experts, and even retired detectives, desperate for a lead. On more than one occasion, she wandered into the forest alone, leaving food and clothing behind in the hope that if Daniel had survived, he might stumble across them. Her obsession with finding him strained her own life, yet she refused to stop. The family's frustration with the authorities only added to their torment. The official stance was simple: no new evidence, no active case. For investigators, Daniel had become another missing hiker lost to the wilderness. But for his family, this explanation was not enough. Daniel knew the trails better than most. He wasn't careless, and he wasn't depressed. Something had happened to him out there, something no one wanted to admit. His father often repeated a single line: "My son didn't just vanish, someone, or something, took him." As the months dragged into a year, the Harris family began holding candlelight vigils at the trailhead where Daniel's car was found. They invited friends, volunteers, and strangers who had been touched by the story. Dozens gathered with lanterns glowing in the darkness, their voices breaking as they prayed for answers. Each vigil ended the same way, with Megan staring into the black silhouette of the forest, whispering that Daniel was still out there, waiting to be found. But the longer the mystery endured, the stranger the family's experiences became. Megan reported receiving anonymous calls at night, someone breathing heavily, then hanging up. Once, the family returned from a hike to find a small stack of stones neatly arranged on the hood of their car, a formation eerily similar to the cairns used as trail markers. To outsiders, these were coincidences. To the family, they felt like messages, as though Daniel, or perhaps whoever was responsible for his disappearance, was still trying to reach them. 18 long months after Daniel first vanished, the mountain finally gave up a clue, though what it revealed was more horrifying than anyone could have imagined. Two hunters, venturing deep into a rarely explored section of the forest, stumbled across something that made their blood run cold. At first, they thought they saw fabric fluttering high in the trees, but as they drew closer, their stomachs dropped. The shape wasn't fabric at all. It was a human body, swaying gently in the wind, suspended unnaturally high above the ground. The men froze, unable to move. The body hung from thick ropes, twisted around the branches at least 20 feet up, as though carefully placed there. The hunters were seasoned outdoorsmen, used to grisly sights in the wilderness, but this was unlike anything they had ever seen. The stench of decay clung to the air, and yet, something about the scene felt almost deliberate, almost staged. Terrified, they backed away and reported the discovery immediately. When authorities arrived, they confirmed what the hunters had suspected. The body was Daniel Harris. His clothing was tattered, his features barely recognizable, but dental records confirmed his identity. The discovery shocked everyone involved in the case. For over a year, the mountain had been silent, offering no trace, no hint of his fate, and now, his remains had appeared in one of the most remote, inaccessible parts of the forest, hung in a way no one could easily explain. The detail that disturbed investigators the most was the sheer impossibility of the location. The branches where Daniel's body was found were slick, high, and fragile. Climbing them would have been nearly impossible, even for an experienced mountaineer. There were no climbing tools, no ropes leading upward, no indication of how Daniel, or anyone else, had managed to position him there. The scene left even hardened detectives unsettled. It was as though someone, or something, had placed him deliberately, high above the forest floor, out of reach. News of the discovery spread quickly, reigniting the case in the public eye. Journalists flocked to Mount Rainier, and speculation ran wild. Was Daniel's death the result of foul play, some kind of bizarre ritual, or an elaborate attempt to send a message? Locals whispered about secret groups in the forest, others about something far more supernatural. The family, already tormented by a year and a half of silence, now faced an even darker reality. Daniel had been found, but the way he was found raised more questions than it answered. The autopsy on Daniel's remains only deepened the mystery. The medical examiner struggled to determine an official cause of death. His body was too decomposed, his injuries too ambiguous. There were no clear fractures from a fall, no obvious signs of an animal attack, and no evidence of defensive wounds. Toxicology results came back inconclusive. The only fact they could state with certainty was that Daniel had been dead for many months, likely close to the time he disappeared. Beyond that, the case file grew cold again, filled with more question marks than answers. The positioning of his body disturbed investigators most of all. For one theory to hold, suicide, Daniel would have needed to scale the fragile branches 20 feet above the ground, rig a complex rope system, and secure himself without any evidence of climbing gear. Yet no such equipment was ever recovered. His backpack, survival tools, and personal belongings were never found near the site. To those who knew Daniel, the theory of suicide didn't fit his personality or the bizarre staging of the scene. Instead, it seemed far more likely that someone, or something, had put him there. Detectives quietly considered foul play, but there were no fingerprints, no discarded items, and no footprints nearby. The remoteness of the location made it even harder to understand. Why would someone go through such lengths to place Daniel in such an unreachable spot? What would they gain? Some whispered that it was symbolic. A ritualistic display meant to send a message. Others feared the implication that the killer wanted Daniel to never be found, hidden in the trees where only chance could reveal him. The Harris family fought bitterly against the notion of suicide, demanding further investigation. His sister Megan held press conferences, her voice trembling with anger, insisting Daniel's death had been staged to look unexplainable. She pointed out the eerie reports of voices in the woods, and strange sightings in the months following his disappearance. To her, these were not coincidences but clues pointing toward something far more sinister than the official reports acknowledged. The family's pleas, however, were largely dismissed by authorities who had no tangible evidence to move forward. Meanwhile, theories multiplied outside official channels. Amateur sleuths speculated about cult activity, citing rumors of groups conducting rituals deep in Washington's forests. Others drew connections to unexplained disappearances in other national parks, arguing that Daniel's case was not an isolated tragedy, but part of a disturbing pattern. Online forums buzzed with speculation, some claiming Daniel had stumbled into something forbidden, something he was never meant to see, and paid the ultimate price for it. The unanswered questions around his death turned the mystery into something larger, something darker, and something no one seemed able to explain. Even after Daniel's body was recovered, the case refused to rest. Locals who had followed the story from the beginning believed his death was just one chapter in a much larger, darker narrative tied to Mount Rainier. The mountain had long carried whispers of vanishings, hikers who left campsites and never returned, climbers whose equipment was found but whose bodies were never recovered, and even entire groups who seemed to disappear without a trace. For many, Daniel had simply become the most unsettling entry in this list. his bizarre discovery a warning to anyone who dared to wander too far. Those who had reported eerie experiences before Daniel's body was found only became more convinced that his presence lingered. Hikers continued to speak of shadowy figures trailing them from a distance, or voices calling out in the same desperate tone witnesses had described months earlier. Some claimed they saw movement high in the trees, as though something, human or not, still hung among the branches, swaying unnaturally even when the wind was still. To this day, that stretch of forest carries a reputation few are brave enough to challenge. Investigators, meanwhile, were never able to provide closure. With the autopsy inconclusive and the evidence scarce, the case was filed away without a definitive answer. Yet the questions surrounding Daniel's fate didn't fade. They multiplied. Why was his body placed so high, far from where his scent trail ended? Why was his gear missing? Why had search teams combed that very area a year earlier without finding a thing? Each mystery stacked upon another until the official record seemed almost laughably incomplete. For the Harris family, the absence of truth was worse than the loss itself. Megan in particular became consumed by the idea that Daniel had uncovered something that cost him his life. She collected every report of strange activity in the area, from mysterious lights seen above the treetops to hikers who vanished under similar circumstances. She began to believe Daniel was part of a larger pattern, a puzzle she felt she was obligated to solve, even if it meant venturing back into the very forest that had stolen her brother. Over time, Daniel's story turned into legend, retold in online forums and campfire tales. Some framed him as a victim of foul play, others as the target of ritualistic forces, and still others as a symbol of the mountain's ancient, untamed power. Whatever the interpretation, one thing remained constant: no explanation ever felt complete. Daniel's fate stands today as one of the most haunting unsolved mysteries tied to the wilderness, a reminder that in places as vast and unforgiving as Mount Rainier, answers are sometimes forever out of reach. And so, the case of Daniel Harris remains one of the most disturbing mysteries ever tied to Mount Rainier. A man who vanished without a trace, only to be discovered 18 months later, hung high in the trees in a way no one could explain. Was it foul play, a ritual, or something far stranger that dwells deep within the wilderness? We may never know. But one thing is certain: Mount Rainier has secrets it refuses to reveal, and Daniel's story is a haunting reminder of how quickly the forest can take and never give back. Tell me, what do you believe happened to Daniel? Was this the work of human hands? Or did he stumble into something beyond our understanding?
If you liked this video, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Most importantly, subscribe and hit the bell icon so the next secret finds you first.